Super grateful to be here. Thank you for all coming. My name's Tim Cooley. I am the Director of Entrepreneurship for the state of Utah. I run the Startup State Initiative for the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity. We do a lot to help encourage the promotion of entrepreneurship throughout the state. I also am the author of the Pitch Deck book, so know a lot about fundraising, and I used to run Park City Angels, and so grateful to be here. And I get to moderate these fine gentlemen. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Brian Case. I'm certified financial planner and a little company called Direct Wealth Care. Started my entrepreneurial career when I was 13, soaking postage stamps off of envelopes with my grandfather, who was a doc. It was from the inter-office mail from his nursing homes. So I got a taste of the entrepreneurial bug pretty early on, and since then I've started 8 companies, sold 6 of them, and learned a lot from 2. My ties to healthcare go pretty deep. Grandpa was a doc, Grandma was a nurse. Ended up marrying a physician, so I ended up in that world of I think of it as physician families. That gave me a real appreciation for what we all go through, and that really colored my wealth management career. So for the past 25 years, I owned a wealth management company that served primarily physician families. Sold that 3 years ago, and I've been focused on trying to improve the overall well-being of physicians through financial well-being. So I've been spending most of my time the last few years on that. A little bit of a soapbox while I'm up here. The reason I'm doing that is we have a real epidemic of in the physician world right now. People don't understand the pressures that they're under, and what it's manifesting as is suicide rates that are about double the general population. And in the between turnover and the burnout, again, epidemic, it's a big problem. It's an $80 billion a year problem. So that's kind of my why I'm spending so much time focused on physicians. I've been an angel investor now for about 20 years back east. When we were in Connecticut, I was involved with a group there for 6 years or so, and then came out here, got involved with Park City Angels and Ted, and I can't see if Alex is out there, but Ted and Alex and I are also working on the Utah Healthcare Innovation Network, which I hope Ted will spend some time talking about because it's his baby and you'll do a better job. But I obviously spend, or not obviously, but I kind of naturally spend most of my angel time on fintechs because that's my background, but I have learned to leverage my network of physicians to try to do, vet out and invest in healthcare companies. So I've ended up with quite a few med tech, health tech, med device companies. And I was telling Ted earlier, I did a retrospective on one that I made back in 2010 that's going to completely color everything, every question Tim asks or everything you guys ask, because I can't believe looking back on it, what that company's been through for the last 15 years. So it was a good case study for me. So anyway, like being here and looking forward to questions.
Hi, my name is Rick Merrell. I'm the Executive Director of the Salt Lake City Angels. We're a 35-member angel investment group here in Salt Lake Valley. We screen about 20 companies, or 20 companies apply to us every month. We wind up having about 4 of them pitch at our monthly meetings, and then we walk through a whole due diligence process. And our average investment is between $100,000 and $200,000 as a group. I've been the executive director for the past 2 years. I've been involved with them as an angel investor for the past 5. My day job is I run a small software development company called Agentis Technology, and I've also founded another company in the past that exited right after COVID. So I've been on the founder side, and now I really enjoy spending my time on the funder side as well. So that's me.
Well, I am not Ann, but unfortunately Ann was called away for a family emergency on Monday, and I was asked to fill in for Ann. So my name is Ted McAleer, and as already mentioned, I'm the co-founder and current board chairman of the Park City Angel Network. We got the group going in 2007. The reason we founded the group in 2007 was that there were 3 venture capital firms in Utah in 2007. All 3 focus on Series A and later, and there really wasn't a lot of angel investment. So we've invested in the last 17 years. We've had over 200 investing members. Today we have 105 dues-paying members. We have made over 140 investments in, we've made thousands of investments in over 140 companies. And probably our favorite company to talk about in our portfolio is High West Distillery. It was a really fun investment to make because we could drink the profits, and just for kind of a highlight, today High West Distillery is probably the most popular restaurant on Park City Main Street. But when we were first investors, we could have a meeting with 40 of us in the High West Distillery, close down the bar, and they were just happy to have 40 people in the restaurant. So things change over time. High West sold to Constellation Brands for $180 million, and that created a 7 or 8x return for the investors in Park City. We invest as individuals, but we also have a sidecar fund. So Rick mentioned the funnel that they have at Salt Lake City Angels. We start at the top of the funnel with 50 pitch decks per month. We whittle that down with a small group. Maybe 2 or 3 people analyze the 50 and determine the 10 that we're going to pay attention to for the month. We talk to those 10 entrepreneurs and then whittle it down through a screening meeting to 3 or 4 companies that pitch to us. When we have our monthly meeting, it's at Jeremy Ranch Country Club, and we generally have 35 to 50 angel investors that listen to 3 20-minute pitches. So happy to talk about anything related to angel investing or what's happened to the ecosystem since 2005 when I joined the ecosystem. So Tim, take it away.
Yeah, awesome. So the panel before us, I believe, skewed what happens in the reality. So every one of those founders raised money. It's really difficult. And I really want to help the audience be prepared if they go out to raise capital. So I want to take this from a perspective of why is it hard, right? And so the first question I have for you guys is, you heard from all the founders in the last presentation that they were mission-driven, right? They were scientists. And so give your opinion on, why that mentality of, this mission, this thing to solve, the science perspective. They think that if they build it, investors will just come, right? So please start us off, Ted.
Yeah. So when angel investors, at least in the Park City Angels, evaluate a deal, we often think about the 5 T's, and it just makes it easy to think about 5 T's before you go into due diligence. So when we think about the 5 T's, we think about team, the technology that the team is developing, the traction in the technology that the team has developed, the 10x potential of the opportunity if we get in on the investment, and finally, what are the terms of the deal? Okay? So we start with team. And the reason we start with team is because nothing ever goes according to plan. And so you want to have an entrepreneur / chief fundraiser that is passionate about the technology, passionate about the problem that they're solving. And I think, judging from, I didn't see the whole panel, but I know Miles Greenberg was on the panel, moderating the panel, and Miles is a MD, MBA who started in venture capital and now does startup companies, right? The guy has been passionate his whole life about transforming healthcare, right, and solving big problems. So I think passion is the number one thing that can drive an entrepreneur to success. The question is, how much capital do they need to achieve their passion, right?
Yeah, Rick, so how do you feel about that, right? If I build it, they'll come, these investors.
Yeah, it's not true. It's not true. Let me just say that very, very clearly and very upfront. As Ted said, He gave a general overview of the 5 Ts. Let me focus on team for a minute, and essentially this notion that if you have a highly technical founder who came up with this great idea that's solving real-world problems, well, the money's just going to come. And for us as angel investors, what we want to see out of the team is not just good product people, good scientists. Whether it's a life sciences product or any other product, we also want to know that there exists within the team people that can go out and market this product, that can go out and sell this product, that can go out and implement this product so that the company grows. Because without those other elements, a company that just has a product is not going to grow. And so when it comes to the founder specifically, even if the founder is a technical founder, that's not a showstopper for us, but what we want to know is the founder has taken the time to also understand what's going to have to happen down the road in terms of sales and marketing, what's going to need to happen down the road in terms of implementation, customer support, that type of thing. They don't have to be an expert in that area, but we need to know that the founder is credible enough to have thought through and can speak to some of those other areas that it takes to run a business, not just the product that's been developed.
So I'm going to add another T, I think, to this, and my word would be translation. Kind of what Rick just said, sometimes we see great technical founders, but we don't understand them. Alex and I just went through this with one out in the hall that you were able to coach and help a lot. But there's a big gap between what goes through these technical founders' ears or minds and, frankly, the team that's close to them too. So having a good coach, somebody who can listen and understand what investors need to see and help translate that, and read Tim's book. Really, it's a big deal, and I don't think, especially early on in companies, that people don't spend enough time really paying attention to that.
Yeah, I completely agree. The translation's a huge issue. A couple years ago, someone pitched Park City Angels, and he was a pharmaceutical, and he's like, here's Pac-Man. We put this thing on that Pac-Man can eat, and then we build Pac-Man. And I was like, oh, well, that was a great way of explaining something that's super complicated. In the book, I use trigeminal nerve ending 8.6. And no one knows what that means, right? And when we get that in a pitch, you're just like, eyes glaze over, and we really stop listening. That's the secret there. What other things have you guys seen that really, from a founder presenting, where you're like, listen, I'm just not interested anymore, or where they're failing in the pitch process? Rick, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, so Salt Lake City Angels it is industry agnostic. So we look at deals from the software industry, consumer products, and life sciences, and biotech, medical devices. So as a result of that, our members have a pretty wide background of experiences. Very few of them, in fact, though, have a life sciences background. So just to amplify what Tim just said, one of the biggest mistakes I've seen founders make when they're pitching to our group is to assume that everybody in the room understands the science and the technology that you're discussing, that your product is based on.
Or even the words.
or even the words. And they just don't. Not everybody in the room is going to understand what it is you're talking about. So I hate this expression, but you do need to dumb it down, so to speak, if you're going to be pitching to angel groups that are not specifically focused on biotech or life sciences. And whether you should do that, how you should do that in terms of pitching to companies or to angel groups that take are industry agnostic, we can talk about that a little bit later. But that would be my number one thing is if you're pitching to a group that's not specifically a biotech or life sciences group, make sure that you present your product or you present the opportunity in a way that almost anybody could understand, not just people with life sciences background.
Yeah, when I was in New York, there was a competition to pitch to the judges, and the judges were in second grade. And so think about if you can't communicate to a second grader, then you're not doing it well enough. What other things have you seen, Brian?
Just real quick on that, I've often said, if your mother can't understand it, then you don't have your pitch down yet. And I said that to somebody once, and they were like, well, my mom's a lawyer, and it was like illegal. Anyways.
Yeah, I think we're looking for non-starters, right? Like
Things that we were just like, oh man, that was just a bad thing to do.
Well, what I have on my mind, I don't know if it directly answers the question, but listening to you, what I hate when I'm the only one, I hate when there's nobody else in the room that's spent any time with the investor. So I guess maybe we call it being a champion. But when somebody is pitching wants to pitch in front of a group, this is kind of what you and I were talking about too. If they haven't done the work to try to kind of know their audience and warm them up a little bit, get some champions in the room, get somebody understand what language to use. It's really hard for us to recommend somebody into the Angels if they haven't done that work, because, well, again, Rick, you were saying it earlier when we were in the hall, you're kind of feeding them to the wolves if we're not careful about who we put there. So my version of that would be, let's do some work ahead of time, understand who you're talking to, and actually talk to them.
Yeah, it speaks to the importance of a solid referral, right? A credibility transfer, right? So if you've met me once at a meeting and I don't know you, and then you put a referral into Park City Angels, this is referred by Ted McAleer. Well, not exactly. We met one time and, we don't have a reputation with each other. But in our particular case, there's 105 Park City Angels, each of whom have a network. And so, finding the champion that, back to the point that these guys just made, who's going to be my champion? Because it's way easier to kill a deal than to keep it propped up, right? So first, get a referral into the group that you're going to pitch to. Make sure that referral person is present when you go to pitch and is giving credibility to what you're saying. And if you don't have that person already in the group, then spend the time to network, with that person to get them to be your credible champion, right? And so I think that's an important piece. And then, the other thing that Tim tries to lay out in the pitch deck book, and in the spirit of full transparency, you'll see that the pitch deck book forward was written by Ted McAleer. Okay, so I do have 650 words in the book that I share about Tim's credibility and, frankly, why you should listen to Tim about how to think about a pitch. And what I take away from the book is you're not pitching to raise money. You're pitching to stimulate the questions that make you better for the next pitch. And at a certain point in time, you do hit the tipping point to be, strictly focused on fundraising. But, don't expect that it's just, one 20-minute session and, a complete stranger is going to embrace you, your product, and the problem that you're trying to solve in 20 minutes.
Yeah, to add to that, I've seen a champion completely change the minds of an entire room in both directions many, many times. And it happens more often than one would think, because somebody in the room, and which is unique about angel investing, is it's individuals choosing how they're going to spend their own money. And if they're like, look, I just saw a pitch last week that was way better than this one in a similar vein, the whole room goes no. Or you're like, listen, this is my guy, and I've bet on him myself, and, and then the rest of the room comes in and participates in the deal.
And we may be going there eventually, but what I want to share based on all of this is we see a lot of investors that don't have a lot of inventors that don't have a plan for this. So to take a step back from the advice of have a champion, have a coach, do all that work, you need a plan for raising money. And a lot of people just throw themselves into the room and try to figure out along the way, and then they find out they need a champion, they find out they need a coach. So I think stage is an opportunity to say, take a big step back. I'm a big fan of a written plan that you can share with other people and say, this is what I'm planning on doing. But it's not about the company. It's a written plan about raising money for the company.
Yes, so why don't we continue with that? So, Ted, can you define the difference between an inventor and an entrepreneur? And then how does one go from or think about making that transition? We heard a lot of great advice in the last panel, but thinking about it now as the inventor.
Yeah. So entrepreneurs are risk takers, right? I mean, if you look it up in the dictionary, it talks about risk taking, it talks about paying it forward, it talks about things that, in my opinion, are around the culture of building teams, growing businesses, growing organizations, and that kind of stuff. In general, right, inventors usually, there's a right brain, left brain, and I'm not smart enough to know which is which, but generally, the entrepreneur comes from one side of the brain, the inventor comes from the other side of the brain, right? That's a vast stereotype, but it's an easy starting point, right? And I'll just reflect on two types of entrepreneurs. Since we're here at a healthcare conference, talking about life sciences and impacting healthcare, if you're inventing a company in that space, you either have been a provider and you understand, healthcare economics and you're trying to make life better for your fellow providers, or you've been a payer and you're trying to make life better for your fellow payers, just the fact that you've been a patient and therefore, you had a bad patient experience and you decide to be an inventor of a product that was based upon a bad patient experience. I've seen that happen, but generally that inventor needs to actually put credible people around them that have had that patient experience multiple times, right? So what I'm trying to say is inventors generally base their invention on their life experience and a big problem. And there's a lot of marginal changes that can be brought to life science, healthcare, and whatnot. What we want to see is you are solving a big problem, right? And we used to talk about it in a class that I used to deliver. Think of it as a shark bite, not a mosquito bite, okay? You can go camping and get 10 mosquito bites and you get irritated, okay? But you still stay on the camping trip, right? If you get a shark bite, it is a big enough problem that you are being put in an ambulance and driven to critical care. There's a huge difference between a shark bite and a mosquito bite. Don't try to convince investors that you're solving a mosquito bite problem and we should care, right?
Yeah, Rick, can you speak to the inventor side on more of the safety side, at a university and that transition?
Sorry, did you say me?
Yeah. Anybody, but.
Sure. Obviously, a lot of life sciences, a lot of med tech, biotech gets incubated and comes out of the university setting. A lot of the R&D and even a good chunk of the product development can be done in that environment. But in that environment, it's typically being funded by what we investors like to call non-dilutive capital, right? Which basically means the money's just there. When you now are transitioning into the commercialization, which is at the time, I would argue you need to transition from not just being an inventor, but now becoming an entrepreneur, that's then when you're going to have to then jump into this whole fundraising game, maybe. And if I could, Brian, I want to pick up on something that you said about having a sponsor and somebody like that in the room. And having a written plan. I would ask yourselves a couple questions as you're thinking about how do I want to go about fundraising? How do I want to make this transition out of the university non-dilutive capital funded arena into the commercialization and angel-backed, venture-backed space? And I think one of the questions you need to ask yourself is, do I need to raise money at all? Is it possible that I can bootstrap what I've got going on here? I've founded a couple companies and I've done it both ways. One of the nice things about bootstrapping is you don't have to waste a lot of time fundraising, right? A lot of it, and it takes as many of you may already know, it takes a ton of time, in particular for the CEO, to go out and do fundraising, which is time that you're now not spending on product development and sales and marketing. So do you have to fundraise at all, or could you maybe go a little bit slower but bootstrap the company? Now, I realize in the whole life sciences, medtech, biotech space, oftentimes it does take a lot of money to bring these products to market. So I think the second question you need to ask yourself, and back to Brian's point about having a written fundraising plan, is can I go out and can I identify angel groups, venture capital groups, or private equity groups that specialize in investing in the type of company that I'm bringing to market? Can I find people that understand the whole life sciences arena, the whole biotech arena, and target those people first? Because they're going to understand best what you're talking about, and they're going to understand best the problem that it is that you're trying to solve. And then, again, back to Brian's point, if you are going to come to a group like ours that not only looks at biotech, but looks at many, many other industries, make sure that you sort of pre-qualify that group and ask the question, hey, do you have people in your group that have a life sciences background? Do you have people in your group that are going to be able to vouch for what I'm talking about here? If the answer is no, I would recommend you don't waste your time going after that group. So not only do I think you should have your plan written down, I think you should kind of go about it in a very methodical way and do a really good job of identifying the groups who are most likely going to get it, is how I'll say it. Especially to your question, Tim, when you're coming out of a university non-dilutive capital setting and now having to fundraise for commercialization, if that helps.
Can I go? Yeah. So to expand on what you're saying a little bit, that early group of investors, potential investors that you're vetting out, the other thing to look for is who is in the network that can give you access to people like that. So you may get a no from Park City Angels, no, we don't have those people, but we might know them. And I've said this a couple times in the last couple days. I've seen our angel group, and to go back to Alex, because you did a great job, the angel groups aren't just there to write checks. Like, that's not all we do. Right. We get in that mode sometimes. I get in that mode sometimes. It's just yes or no, we're investing or not. But the reality is we have networks that we can share with people early on. So part of that plan for me would be, how do I get into those networks? So I think I said in my intro, like, one of the things that I do is leverage my networks for vetting out my investments. I'm more than happy to do that for other people if I'm asked. So that's the distinction I wanted to make, is it's not just check writers.
Yeah, totally. Another thing I want to add to this and get some more clarity around is, I call this the valley of death, right? So you're in the safe environment, right? You're building this technology, you're building some pharmaceutical, whatever. You raise we've seen a company raise $16 million through non-dilutive funding, but couldn't sell anything, right? But they've decided they're going to go out and raise capital, right? They need that $5 million to kind of carry them through. Can you give us a story of a company you've seen do this and either be successful or not be successful? Like, through that time frame of, waiting for FDA clearance or whatever.
I can give you an example that might be successful. We're still in the middle of it. So I think I mentioned earlier an investment I made back in 2010. At one point, they were developing this key product that they wanted to grow market with because it was the biggest market for all their technologies that they had kind of put together, all their IP. And it took us, as a board, it probably took us a year to realize, oh, this other IP we could sell and buy us some time for our final mission, which is the bigger product that's still not quite done. But we were able to sell some of the IP that came from developing our initial idea.
How did you guys keep that company funded throughout, like, multiple funding rounds? Because I'm sure they ran out of capital or real close at one point.
Oh yeah, no, they were absolutely out. But selling the IP was the kind of non-traditional way that took us a while. That actually spurred on some additional investment because everybody realized we had more IP than we thought we did. So it was an interesting dynamic, and it's actually how the company funded itself until, I don't know, probably 4 years ago now, when they raised another. I think their Series B, yeah, Series B got raised about 4 years ago now.
So you talk about this valley of death, right? And do I have an example of a company that's been there? Well, yes, but I want to tell you a different story. Because my recommendation is don't fall into the valley, right? Don't get yourselves there. So we had a awesome company out of Texas come pitch to Salt Lake City Angels about a year ago. They had come up with some technologies that would rapidly increase getting results from genetic tests out of a lab, from weeks down to minutes, right? So pretty groundbreaking, innovative type of technology. And here they're out doing all this fundraising, and when I got the CEO off to the side, I said, "Hey, Brian, like, why are you fundraising? You know, why are you coming out to angel groups?" He's like, "I just thought that's what we were supposed to do, to raise capital." I said, "Brian, have you gone back to the NIH? Have you looked at potential grants or even contract opportunities there?" "No, I really haven't." I said, "Well, why don't you do that?" He calls me like a month later, and he's like, "Rick, we got $2 million coming in the door. It's going to give us enough runway for a year and a half." I said, "Brian, that's great. Take your runway, develop your product, get it to the point where you're ready to commercialize, and then come back to us and talk to us about 6 months before your money's going to run out." So my recommendation about how to handle when you're in the valley is don't get there. Don't be there.
Yeah, so when I first started working with the University of Utah in 2006, I had the good fortune to work with Jack Britton, who was dean of the business school. And we said, turn the valley of death into the chasm of inconvenience, okay? And you know, it takes kind of a picture to show that, but a chasm can actually be really deep, you know, but it's just like one giant step to get across the chasm, right? As opposed to a valley, which, you know, is more of a time-oriented activity, right? So if you think about that from, you know, an analogy standpoint, you know, how do you de-risk the company so that, you know, the valley becomes a chasm, and, you know, with one giant step you can, you know, cross the chasm, you're on the other side, and you keep accelerating. So what do I mean by that analogy? So as angel investors, we like to see that if you're a technical founder, an MD, a PhD, a master's student, somebody who's put a lot of energy into learning the dynamics of something that we don't understand, I always say, hey, go find a jury of your peers that thinks that what you're doing is disruptive and unique. And that jury of your peers is called the SBR STTR program, right? And they'll give you a phase 1 that goes through 1 through 3 and a phase 2 that goes through 4 through 6, but then you still have to get through, you know, 7 through 9, right? So my favorite case study of this is a company that the founder is starting a discovery meeting with Park City Angels, so I know he's not in the room at 4 o'clock, so I'll talk about him. It was a PhD student at the University of Utah named Brett Davis. And Brett Davis was solving a problem that he cared about, which was opioids. He had suffered from opioids. He wanted to solve that problem. And, you know, we got around my kitchen table and said, you know, let's write that plan for the journey, right? And I said, you got to get an NSF phase 1 jury of your peers. He got that. I said, well, while we're working on the NSF phase 2, let's get an NIH phase 1. Right? So now he's gotten NSF folks that come from a certain color, and he gets NIH folks that come from a, you know, kind of different background. Both of them, jury of his peers, give him, you know, phase 1. Then they get to phase 2. But along that journey, they had to raise a little bit of capital. And they realized that, you know, they wanted to go to high net worth individuals in a tangential industry. So they were able to raise their first round of private capital from something that was not on the azimuth that they were targeting, but it helped them with developing their, you know, nanomaterials that they needed for their azimuth. And, you know, actually raising that private capital from a tangential market that wasn't your first choice was actually great, because the family office that funded it got what they needed for their more than $1 million, and actually proved that the family office didn't want to go into the tangential market, right? So now Brett and the Rebel Medicine folks have taken the private capital, proved what I would call a secondary market wasn't the market that they wanted to be focused on, but during that time, they were able to finish validating the endpoints for phase 2, NSF, NIH, and keep going along the journey, right? Most recently, Rebel Medicine has gotten one of the smartest angel investors in Utah in life sciences, Gary Crocker's family office, to write a big check. And back to the point we've talked about, now that they need that money for the next phase, and they found somebody who has successfully commercialized multiple pharmaceutical companies himself and invests in that space, it's easy for Park City Angels to look at it again, because it's been validated, with multiple millions of dollars from somebody that has spent 40-year career in pharmaceuticals, right? So, that journey for Brett Davis started, as a third-year PhD student in 2018, and, it's still continuing today in 2025, and, they're realistic about their milestones, and they keep plugging away.
Hey, I just thought another great analogy. You guys may not know, Ted here, he's got an Army background. I've got an Air Force background. The Army has to actually go down into and march through valleys. We Air Force guys, we just fly over them. So be the Air Force. Don't go down in the valley. Get over it.
Yeah. But when the Air Force can't figure out where they're going, they will ask the Army to go out and actually light the target for them, okay? So anyways, let's not digress
We'll move on.
that far. We might even need the Navy, Dave. Navy intel right there. We'll find a way to bring you into the conversation.
Yeah. So we got about 7 minutes left. I'd like to open up to questions, but before we do that, what are you seeing that founders are doing from a trend-wise to raise capital in this space? Like, one example that you gave, Ted, was great. Another one, like I've seen, is they're coming out with a direct-to-consumer model. Like, are there any trends you guys are seeing that people are doing to help raise that early capital to get through that valley of death?
Yeah. I mean, again, because we're at a BioUtah conference, I think one of the trends that we're seeing in Utah that I strongly encourage early stage founders to follow is joining an accelerator of their peers, right? I'm sure that Altitude Labs has presented in some way today, and there's over 20 companies at Altitude Labs, each of which has been started by somebody that understands small molecules and has gone through the same inventor journey that you've been on, right? So, I think accelerators of your peers is a trend that we're seeing. And, it's actually the reason that myself and a handful of other people have created the Utah Healthcare Innovation Network. Our goal is to work with med device and software founders and get those folks into a 10-week program where they're learning from each other while we, kind of give them a pathway to hit their next milestones. And so if you're interested in learning more about the Utah Healthcare Innovation Network, which is in some ways built upon what we've learned from angel investing and accelerators, either see myself or my program director is sitting in the second row, Alex Wahlberg. And we'd be happy to tell you what's happening for the Healthcare Innovation Network. A cohort will be starting somewhere soon in the next 30 days.
Cool. So a couple other programs. One, if you're looking for government contracting, Apex Accelerator is part of the governor's office. Happy to make introductions there. Great ways of getting contracts. Another group with us is the Innovation Center. They really help on that STTR, SBIR funding, NSF, all the grant funding. And then there's also the Utah Innovation Fund. which is really for tech transfer, things that are built within the school system and trying to get them out and trying to solve that valley problem.
Yeah, and great for pointing that out. Kudos to Kelvin and BioUtah executives that have helped the legislature understand the importance of that program. They just got another $10 million from the legislative session that ended a week ago Friday. So if you are in this space and have not pitched to the Utah Innovation Fund, I encourage you to do that because if you have technology that emanated from a university, then the Utah Innovation Fund is a great source to give you feedback before you actually go and pitch to angel investors. And at this point in time, they've accepted $40 million from the state of Utah, and they've spent less than $5 million. So relative to dry powder, that's pretty dry, and it needs to be spent. Take it from somebody who, spent $300 million of your legislative taxpayer dollars. You can't just keep putting it in the bank account for your program. You actually have to get the money out there and make impact. And Utah Innovation Fund, I just talked to one of their members. They're going to spend $10 million at least of that $35 million in the next 12 months. So, get a referral to somebody that's on that committee, such as Mr. Iverson, sitting in the second row, right?
Any questions?
Hey, so I am a founder of a tech bio company, actually out of Altitude Labs. We're seed stage. We have a written fundraising plan, but one of my questions is, or one of the things I'm trying to figure out is the balance between being proactive and overwhelming people with the amount of information we could give them. So one of my questions is really like, with something like that written fundraising plan, when do you share it with people? And also, like, how long should it be? Because I have a 2-page version, there's like a 12-page internal version where just it's all our thoughts on paper. So the question is like, what would you like to see and when from from your perspective?
Yeah. So any of us could probably take this. I'll just say, I like to see a one-pager that I can read, quickly and understand and get it, right? And if I get it, the problem that you're solving and the solution to that problem, then I or one of my colleagues would probably say, well, send me the 12 PowerPoint non-confidential pitch deck. Right? And to answer your question, you may have 40 supporting slides that could come in Q&A, but we're going to give you 10 minutes to present 12 PowerPoint slides. And if you don't have the correct 12 PowerPoint slides, we're going to tell you what those 12 PowerPoint slides are. And if you only can fill out 8 of those 12 PowerPoint slides, then you need to keep working on product market fit for the other 4, right? And it's that simple, right?
Let me ask a clarifying question. So have a 1-page executive summary. That's what I start with. If we get a meeting, you send the 10-page pitch deck. It's the sort of like start of due diligence where you're not necessarily in due diligence or not. What I'm saying is specifically like a fundraising plan in terms of how we're going to spend money and the timeline of that. Is that something that you guys would expect to see or would like to see a proactive version of, or is that something that I wait?
You have to have a plan for it. And what I'll say is start with the cap table. That's my favorite place for you to start, because if it's going to take 3 rounds and it's going to take 3 rounds, then show us the dilution that's going to occur at each of the 3 rounds and what the time sequence is for those 3 rounds. What are the technical milestones that you need to validate this and step up to the second round and then step up to the third round, right? So I personally think that the cap table timeline is as important as anything in a longer term fundraising plan.
Quick short answer if I understand your question, similar to what Ted said. When you are initially pitching our group in particular, we want to know that you have thought through a fundraising plan, that you have one. We don't need the details, and don't waste your 10 minutes trying to give us those details, but convince us that you have one and then be able to share those details once we enter into our due diligence phase. Does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah, my little 2 cents is all we know for sure is it's wrong,
Yeah.
right? So to Rick's point, you thought about it, you took a stab at it, you know better than we do, right? That's what we're looking for is you did the work, and now, you know, we're big boys, we understand that it's just not going to work out like that.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. We'll be around a little bit. If you guys have any questions, feel free to chat with us, but thank you guys for all your advice.